Can you hear me properly?
Yeah, I can hear you. How's it going?
Yeah, it's going all right, you know. It's boiling hot.
Yeah,
But other than that, yeah, it's good.
cool.
Did you get out to the park today?
Yeah, every day I'm in the park. So
At Richmond Park, isn't it?
yeah, I'm just kind of
Nice.
yeah recalibrating.
Has it been quite busy?
Um,
The parks over here are just rammed.
Not too busy because it's a massive park, which is the good thing about
Yeah.
that park place.
Yeah.
So
Oh, you frozen just a bit. Sorry, I didn't hear that
yeah,
last bit.
yeah, it's kind of relatively busy, but it never gets really that busy because it's so big.
Mm, that's great. How's everything been over the past couple of weeks since we last spoke?
Um,
How's quarantine and everything been?
it's been cool. I mean, I've been out again. Everything is kind of going back to this weird sense of, kind of normality.
Yeah,
Not normality, but it's like a kind of pretend normality in that
for
people are
sure.
back on the trains. I've had to mix the Kemet album. So I've had to
Mm,
go into London kind of proper to do
yeah,
that, with my masks and everything, kind of not touching anything in the hand sanitizer and all that kind of stuff. So it's been kind of
yeah,
strange to be not on lockdown in that I'm seeing people and kind of getting on public transport again.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm just gonna getting on with it. I had to write this piece on Black Lives Matter for the big issue that's coming out tomorrow, I
Oh,
think.
cool. Oh,
Um,
cool.
yeah, that was a kind of traumatic event for me. That kind of took up
Yeah,
about, a big chunk of my, my last week in terms of what I did to write it. I kind of did a kind of
yeah.
free flow of um, thinking, basically. I kind of just thought about race for about,
Mm,
for a week and just wrote all my thoughts and I kind of kept writing and writing and writing. And then as the
yeah.
deadline came closer, it was that kind of manic phase of trying to craft a piece from all of my thoughts about what the situation what the situation is. I made myself watch the kind
Mhm.
of George Floyd video again and to kind of really kind of set in mind why I'm doing it, the exercise.
That's heavy. Was there a little bit of a disassociation from yourself as you're into the writing process? Like, how does that kind of work for you?
Um,
Like, if you're having to, is there a bit of a distancing or what does that?
well, this was one of the big things about it. It's having to
Yeah.
push through all of the possibilities in that. Yeah, I think
Mhm.
when it started out, there was a distance. It was me writing in abstract what I thought race is and what I thought the racial situation is. And as I kind
Yeah.
of, wrote more and more, it became more personal. Then you get these kind of thoughts of what I'm giving of myself rather than what I'm giving as a reflection of what I think the situation is.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's for me the reason why you've got to do a load of writing if you're going to do any writing, and then edit
Yeah.
from the mass, so you get all perspectives possible, and then you kind of like reduce it into what you think is reflective of what you want. Because I thought the big thing that I was trying to negotiate at the beginning
Mm.
was what perspective I'm trying to give. Like, am I trying to write for white people? Am I trying to write for black
Yeah.
people? Am I trying to
Yeah.
give a reflection of what I think outside of all of that?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think I kind of can't tell you who I wrote for in the end, but it's definitely a reflection of where my head was at after all of the writing. Yeah,
Yeah, and I suppose if you're doing that whole distancing thing from yourself to try to gain a bit of wider perspective, again, kind of with the consideration of who the audience is, it's like that's a
exactly.
hard decision to make.
Yeah,
That can be quite, there's a tension there.
yeah. But
Yeah,
that's the kind of tension that I think you can only resolve by really facing it. You know,
yeah, yeah.
really understanding that the tension exists, and you've got to, there's got to be a way to deal with it.
Yeah, that I think that kind of speaks to Du Bois' like double consciousness that you're looking at yourself as you're writing the work, but you're also looking at yourself as you are being looked at.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the
Um,
double consciousness is an interesting thing. Just in like when I moved to England, moved back to
mhm,
England at 16, one of the biggest
yeah.
things that I kind of remember commenting on was this duality that I saw in most black people that I, kind of came into contact with in relation to how they were by themselves versus how they
Mm,
were
mm,
within a white gaze.
Yeah.
And, living in Barbados, there's just not that many white people,
Yeah.
So
You're
I
just
didn't have
black.
to, yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't have to think
Yeah.
about it. It
Yeah.
wasn't a thing that I had to negotiate. Whereas coming
Yeah.
to England, there was like, if there was a black event, as in no white people, I saw a difference in terms of just, I don't want to use any words that are reductive, but the easiest thing for me to say would be just like relaxation into how we are,
Yeah, of
as
course.
opposed to trying to, subconsciously, even if it is that, trying to negotiate all of these factors in terms of how you're viewed if you do certain things, how how you be, the ease of being, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's heavy. Um, and yeah, I mean, I suppose the only other kind of comparison I have to that would be Jamaica. And I suppose the entire Caribbean has, well, most countries in the Caribbean have, islands of the Caribbean have this kind of similarity. Do you know what I mean? And coming to
Yeah,
a place like Britain, the experience is so different, which I think again points to the necessity to create and to write stories that are nuanced and that show the differences between how we exist in the world, that we're not a homogenized monolithic group of people, you know.
exactly.
Yeah, it's crucial. But yeah, thanks for being here. This is wicked. I would just first want to shout out Eternal Remedy for just providing this space for us to be here into this fourth week of the Embodied series. And so today we're kind of thinking a little bit about creative purpose. So thanks for everybody for kind of joining us. It's been a heavy month. So much has happened even since the last time that we spoke. It's
I
like
know, yeah.
time is just expanding and collapsing on itself over and over again.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, it's been heavy. How have you been finding everything just with the protests and everything that had kind of happened?
It's interesting. I haven't gone to any protests just because I don't trust the lack of coronavirus.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
my existence is wrapped up in my lungs,
yeah,
and
of course.
I don't want to be any spots with loads of people.
Yeah,
But what I think is really phenomenal is
mm,
how a lot of institutions have all of a sudden realized that they have to address a racial, the racial issue, and this is something that
mm,
hasn't just popped up because people say that it needs to be done, done now. It's something that I think has tapped into the work that has been done before in people trying to address these issues of diversity, issues of accountability in terms of, lack of diversity or just racism within structures in this country and America.
yeah,
It feels like, because everyone knows, if someone said, if people have been saying there is a problem for years and years, it's not necessarily going into an empty vessel in terms of the wider
yeah,
society,
for sure.
but
Yeah,
society maybe has been programmed to either delegitimize the voices or just ignore them, believe
mm,
alternate propaganda which suggests that either these people are lying or there is actually
yeah,
no problem. So I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that, society's, I don't know, subconscious or something has made, the racial issue more, how do I describe it? More of a thing. Like, it
yeah,
feels like on an institutional level, like people
yeah,
can't, you can't have, there has to be an acknowledgement on some,
yeah,
some kind of, resolution in terms of what racial etiquettes are, what racial codes are. And for me, it's great because it's a starting point. I don't think that
mm,
companies are saying, like, my ex music college Guildhall put out this statement saying, we acknowledge that lots of people have said there's racial issues in the past.
yeah,
We're really sorry about it. We're looking into it. You can contact the principal directly if there's anything. And I think, it might be an accurate statement, but at least it's a statement. At least
yeah.
at least there is some acknowledgement that, there has been problems in the past and that there will be at least an attempt to listen. And I think that's always the first stage, you know.
Because we've heard like so many different opinions naturally, just
Yeah,
byproduct of everything that's been going on. And when we say things like, at least it's just
yeah,
so many people we have a lot of different opinions about the at least bit. there's
Yeah.
this kind of resistance to thinking that it's the minimum is okay. And I think that's been kind of interesting to think about, because on one end it's like, well, we have to kind of start somewhere. There needs to be a certain level of progression. But on the other hand, there's a sort of kind of, there's a fear, of course, because the system has never been in our favor. So who are we, and you know, kind of how can we trust what these institutions are saying is going to be the future, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot trust anything. You can't trust anything. And
Yeah,
you know, for me,
yeah,
it's anything that starts on social media and is a big, you know, product of the mentality of social media is going to be transient. But
yeah,
it's a first step. You know,
yeah,
I do believe that it's not about what's happening now. It's about actually how things that are happening now are consolidated in the future. You know,
yeah.
if there is a
Mhm.
pressure to keep on going, keep on actually applying pressure to the promises that these institutions have made, then things will
Mhm.
work out. You know, things will come to the better. If it's just that institutions can say, we've held a kind of race talk with three black
Yeah,
people and we promise we won't be bad again, then, you know,
yeah.
nothing will happen. And, you know, the minimum effort won't be good enough. And because in and
No,
of itself, it isn't good enough, you know.
no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think the pressure, creating pressure is one of the most important parts of the entire conversation, is like not just being satisfied or satiated with the promise to something better, you know, that we have to keep on keeping on, as they say. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about Shabaka the ancestors, because that, like, I don't know if it was planned, but it came at like a bit of an eerie perfect timing when you released the project, with everything that would come up, would kind of reveal itself. I suppose maybe any piece of work that isn't produced, I'm sorry, I mean, it wasn't produced within the confines of time, you know,
Mm.
and it wasn't a piece of work that was meant to live within the trend or the market, and really kind of expanded on this necessary function of art. It kind of worked so perfectly within the midst of disaster. And it revealed kind of a beauty that has place in pain and in sadness and hopelessness. There was this kind of return to history that worked so perfectly within the context of everything that's happened, within the world. So I just wanted to kind of make mention that that project was just, it was absolutely brilliant. And
Yeah,
yeah, speak
thanks.
speak of it.
Yeah, it's, you know, a lot of people have said, you know, commented on that, the kind of eerie, you know, coincidence or the eerie
Mm,
prophetic nature of the album.
mm,
And I am as shocked as anyone else that actually
yeah,
the album, you know, even to the fact that the album was released on March the 13th, you know, the Friday the 13th, which, you know, was the day that, at least in England, you know, it felt like everything changed in terms of the public's attitude towards the oncoming crisis.
yeah,
And all I can say, honestly, is that we try to ensure our place in the world as much as possible on an individual and a
mm,
communal level between the
yeah,
bands.
yeah,
And, you know, the album was definitely that. The album, all the themes on the album come from conversations that we have, you know, very truthful and very open conversations that we have amongst ourselves in the band.
yeah,
You know, the idea of a real examination of patriarchy and how it reflects, you know, and
mm,
vulnerability, and how that needs to be at the forefront of going forward post the burning, you know, and the
yeah,
burning of the institutions that we create for ourselves in our mind. That was the conversation that we were having, you know,
mm,
in the studio. You know, Sia, the poet and singer from the group, he's got a young child, a young daughter, you know. So a
yeah,
lot of the times we're talking about how are we, you know, living in this world, trying to make the, at least our interactions, reflective of the kind of society we want to see for his daughter. You know, how is he relating
mm,
to his daughter in terms of, you know, how he relates to the, you know, the wider woman, you know, kind of female or woman with an X community.
yeah,
At large, you know, these themes, we, you know, when we make the album and then we go back and you know, we reflect on what we were just dealing with at the time. And
yeah,
I think that the idea of the burning, the idea of the end, and the idea of a rebirth or reimagining, and what
yeah,
needs to be done through that, that was definitely just something that we just were, you know, were kind of talking about and intuiting, and it happened. And I think this, you know, it
Yeah.
really gives me faith in the power of art to allow your intuition to just know what's happening, what's actually happening in the present. And for me, a real acknowledgement of the present is a kind of a peek into the future. You know,
Yeah.
because there are signs around. You know, everything has. I don't know. I'm not a very big believer in the present being the kind of, you know, the stationary moment.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
time is constantly kind of going forwards and backwards. And if you look at it from a kind of African ontology perspective, time is cyclical, or an acknowledgement of time and acknowledgement of the causality of situations is cyclical. So the more you can appreciate a nuanced understanding of the past and a really, you know, in-depth understanding of the present, for me, the future kind of gets unraveled, you know, from that. And then you go into the future, and the future, you know, you realize in the future that actually you need to learn more about the past. You know, the past becomes something that unravels, you know, as you go forward.
That's wild. That's heavy when you really think about it. There's this like harmonic and this kind of melodic repetition in the early moments of They Must Die, followed by the We Are Sent by History. I'm not sure whose voice that was on that. Okay, cool. That really struck me. There's this circular relationship within the use of the circular breathing, but also in the stories that come back and allow us to take from and add to. There's this like historical reinvention, this historical re-envisioning, and this necessary redefining. And I was kind of thinking about this like circularity, and that it's important for us to know that we can preserve these stories kind of amidst the loss of breath.
Exactly.
And when we're thinking about incidences of George Floyd and Tony McDade and Breonna Taylor, like that kind of relationship between the loss of breath, but also within your circular breath in those songs was absolutely profound. That there's this kind of collective breath within our diasporic community that creates this kind of collective consciousness, which I think was mad. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, just to add to that kind of circularity is, you know, the lyrics from that first song, you know, They Who Must Die, they stem from the liner notes from the first album that were written by Linda Hule and Kosi, where she talks about the burning within the context of, you know, the Fees Must Fall protests that were happening in South Africa at that time, like 3-4 years ago. So the They Who Must Die is a conversation between Sia and, you know, Linda Hule's liner notes, you know, as a beginning, as an opening of like, this is the burning, this is the point zero where we have to take a break from what we considered to be, you know, the status quo, what we considered to be, orthodoxy, and what, you know, how do we go forward from here?
Nathaniel McKee talks a little bit about the idea of this double breath that I think exists within the vocals as well as the poetry. Within a lot of those songs, and that there's this lyricism, but then there's also within the body's breath, but then there's the reeds of you playing the saxophone or the clarinet or just any kind of wind instrument during the time, you know. And I think that's really interesting to think about, because there's this particular redefining that feels within the music that we're really not alone. There's two breaths existing, which when you listen to the song, you think, you know what, we're actually really a part of this collective thing, the elongation of the breath in the music, and that it could indeed be the last, but creates a certain promise of another in a strange way. It's like juxtaposition happening.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like literally the breath of life is, you know, is that kind of seminal phrase for a reason, because the breath is the foundation of you know, of the vibration that creates our, you know, our existence. If you're just looking at it from even just an atomical level, you know. And you know, I thought about it a lot, just kind of playing a reed instrument, you know, and breathing, like, you know, the kind of the circularity of the breath is a part of what I do in terms of playing. And it's really, you know, like when you say we are not alone, it's when I'm playing, when I'm kind of in that kind of circular musical zone, you do feel that you know, you are not alone, you know, surrounded by all the information, all the lessons, all the full the dreams and the hopes of everyone that I've come into contact with, specifically people of, you know, that I consider to be of my, you know, my lineage. And that's not necessarily just blood lineage. It's informational lineage, it's racial lineage, it's kind of societal lineage. Everything gets processed and stays with you. And to me, it's how you create the environment where the information that you get can be processed and can be actually used and manifested in a way that's productive. Because you can actually read all the books and you can talk to all the people and get all this information and not find your outlet for actually exhalation, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you breathe in and you breathe in and you breathe in, you take all the stuff in, but actually the point is that there needs to be a circularity, it needs to come out. And for me personally, that act is the artistic practice, you know, the practice of playing my instrument, or the practice of thinking in an artistic way. And that's just me. It might be different for everyone. It might be that for you, when you're cooking, it puts you into a space where you're able to process things just from the actual kind of time space. I don't know. But
yeah, from the kind of the method itself, like allowing yourself to kind of the idea of being like a conduit of the thing and allowing it to just literally breathe and live through you.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was thinking about in Black music, which we'd spoken about before, but when Baraka speaks about, I don't remember if it's Sonny Rollins or who he was speaking about, but the idea that whenever this particular musician would play a piece of work, that there was always reference to people who would come before him, like, oh, you play the sax really like quite similar to Coltrane, or that line on the piano sounds so similar to Cecil Taylor. And this idea that like a musician couldn't perform or play a piece of music that was innate to themselves, which I think was interesting, because when we're thinking about looking back on history, we are taking a large piece of the people who've come before us, and there's a necessary influence on our present work, whether it is a circular continuum.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Like that because this very contradictory ideas, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I believe in the principle of ancestral worship and the principle of time being cyclical. You know, for me, you've got to look at it from a fundamental level, like outside of the mystique that I think a lot of people, when you say ancestral worship, you see people kind of eyes glaze over and they get this kind of like, you know, this is going to be some mystical thing. You know, for me, it's about looking at like what remains. You know, you have a life full of creating energy, creating these kind of interconnecting kind of spirals of information between people. You have, you know, individuals that have for lack of a better word, certain vibes, certain spirits, attitudes towards being, and they create, you know, bodies of information around them. Is it that when they pass away, it just goes away? You know, I think that it doesn't work like that. People create bodies of information and bodies of energy, and when the physical body passes away, there are ways of accessing, even by kind of remembrance, by really concentrated remembrance, what they have done. And for me, that's the kind of principle of ancestors worship, putting yourself into positions where you can call upon what someone has been in the past and maybe embody them. So for instance, there is a saxophone player, there was a saxophone player called David Touré, from London. He was, you know, amazing saxophone player. He sadly passed away maybe like 6 years ago. He was really, you know, before the whole UK jazz thing became popular, became a thing, you know, he was really, really doing it. I think he started playing the sax at like 13, 14. And by the time he was 18, I think, by the time, he died at that point in his life, he was really like crazy good, as in like genius level. And as in, I saw him like 1 year and it was like, yeah, this kid is great. And then I saw him a couple, like a year later, and it's like, oh my God, this guy is like blowing my mind. I don't know how he's for me, it's like, I don't know how he's actually been able to get to this level in this amount of time. And he sadly passed away before you know, before, if you look at time on a kind of linear level, before he could achieve his potential. But I remember when he passed, for, you know, for a long time afterwards, I'd get to a level of playing, and then I would, you know, without trying to do it consciously, I would just all of a sudden appreciate what he was trying to do. I would see, you know, and that might just be a vibe thing. It might be that, you know, that look in his eye, you know, that kind of synchronicity he has with the music. All of a sudden, I saw, it's like I see the world through his eyes while playing, you know. And I remember kind of when I kind of clocked it, you know, this is why Dave Touray is coming into my head all the time when I'm playing. And I was like, okay, you know, I'm going to take this and try to move it forward. You know, and for me, that Dave Touray isn't gone. You know, the physical manifestation of him, but everything that we try to do, you know, everything I'm trying to do, you know, you know, as a musician, in gathering his spirit and trying to take it forward, is a reflection of the fact that he, you know, he will never pass away completely. I think that is the, you know, the kind of centerpiece of ancestral worship. How do you create the rituals that allow you to take what someone has done in the past and bring it to life and embody it, and actually use it as a way of gathering intelligence and utilizing intelligence that you have already?
Yeah, wow. I think that speaks to kind of the moments that live beyond the disaster. And this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. And your project, like particularly We Are Sent Here by History, does exactly that for those of us who aren't musicians, that you're kind of creating this preservation of that history so that the rest of us can kind of access as a way to create maybe rituals within our own creative expressions. And so I think like this kind of continuum, that this harnessing that you are doing within your work is then being transferred onto the rest of the kind of diasporic, not even diasporic, but just the global community in general, that a writer might listen to the album while kind of writing something or creating a painting or whatever. And that influence is necessarily transferred. And that, again, like you said, like that manifestation is transferred onto the next person. So you've created a bit of a beautiful kind of process, and maybe without even knowing, but I'm sure that's probably the point.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like you never know, like where the art goes in that. You know, one of the reasons I like the idea of doing the poetry in conjunction to the music. So every track off the album has the adjacent poem, and the title of the track is embedded within the poem. And the reason I like that kind of poem, as in it's just like 4 lines within a maybe 8 to 12 track, is that it gives you the space as the listener to ensure what it's about, you know. And so a lot of people go, you know, so, you know, read the poem, we listen to the music, what's it about? And I'm like, you tell me. You know, I just try to get as into my head and as truthfully as possible, and just get it out there. And then I would like the audience to tell me, what do you think? Because what the audience thinks is as legitimate as what I think, you know. And actually it's something that I remember, you know, from Dave Chappelle's comedy sketch, the 8 minutes, 40, whatever, where he's saying, you know, why is it because he's a celebrity that his voice matters more than anyone else's voice, you know, within the current, you know, crisis. And I really do believe that we don't necessarily, it's not necessarily that the people that society attributes relevance to that have, you know, necessarily the more important things to say. You know, and once that realization is you know, again, embodied, then I think we will move forward, because actually we don't have the answers. You know, there needs to be like some radical thinking. And there are people, everyone is contributing. There are people that are contributing, you know, every day. But for me, it needs everyone contributing. Like every single person contributing in whatever way is applicable to their lives. So like whatever situation, like, so this is like when I've talked to people about, you know, that say, oh, but maybe not, you know, nothing's going to happen within the scale of the protest, or maybe it's not enough. I think, you know, if everyone within their own racial, racial discourses or dialogues day to day, actually takes that energy and tries to you know, push it forward. And it might be that you're having that conversation with your mother, having that conversation with your coworker. You know, for me, it's the fact that actually everyone is, you know, a lot of people are saying, you know what, for whatever, however we can do on whatever level, we're going to try to push forward the situation, you know. Yeah, I think that's an important thing to do.
Yeah, to just work within your own capabilities, because there's this necessary pressure that says that you have to, like, for example, your reference point to the protest. That's like a good example of just like, yeah, some people don't want to go and protest because there's a pandemic happening. Right? So it's the whole thing where, like, if you don't want to go out to the protest, that's okay, but how can you mobilize? And I think, like, creating these options that there's not, you know, these things are not necessarily in conflict with one another. Like, one method of protest can exist alongside something else and it be just as profound and just as meaningful and just as powerful. And I think that's a reminder, because there's internal guilt as well. I think sometimes
there is definitely internal guilt. I think the thing that we all need to remember is that society wants us to be individualistic. They want us to think that our individual detachment from any course of action is going to be the thing that topples it or contributes ultimately to it. But we are a collective, communal, you know, organism in terms of the Black diaspora. And what the work that people are doing in America, you know, the work that people are doing in America, for me, has a really resonant impact with what's happening in the UK. What people are doing here, you know, helping the statues, has a resonance over there and, you know, and everywhere. I think everyone has a role to play, and I think all the roles can and should be the same. You know, like in any kind of communal society, everyone doesn't do the same thing, but everyone does need to contribute something. And this is where that deep thinking needs to come in from on an individual level. You know, of what are you gonna? This is the time to contribute. How are you gonna contribute? And are you doing, you know, your best at it? And that is all a question that everyone, you know, only individuals can answer inside of themselves. You know, no one can say you should be doing this, or, you know, because I don't know what people, you know, it might, you know, like for me, it's like I might wake up and just cannot face, you know, talking or interacting with anything to do with race. And it might be that, you know, that's what I need as a self-care method to just kind of recharge. And then actually when I come back to it, you know, I'm actually able to kind of think and see more clearly, because you don't want to run yourself into the ground, you know, doing this work.
For sure. And you don't want to see and think about yourself all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that just makes it even more challenging to produce any work outside of yourself. Like that is in conjunction with the work itself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That you're almost a little bit of it, you're interrupting the work by constantly thinking about your existence within the world, which doesn't work.
Yeah. And
does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of, I think that the biggest challenge with racism, you know, with the history of racism, and actually the history of the kind of white supremacist interaction with blackness, is that it can just throw you off course, you know.
For sure.
As in, you've got to spend all this time defending your position in the world, or just defending your position in the world and trying to create, you know, equality, trying to do this and that. And actually, if you weren't trying to do it, if the white structure sorted itself out, even though that's wishful thinking, you know, what would we be thinking of? Where would we be trying to go? And I would actually, you know, put forward the kind of radical suggestion that if we were just not trying to battle, I'm talking on a large historical kind of anthropocenic level, if we weren't trying to battle white supremacy, maybe we would actually be finding the answers to a sustainable way of staying on the planet. You know, because if you look in terms of the historical labeling of cultures as primitive or backwards or savage, those are the cultures that were living, you know, with nature, that were living at one with nature, that would have kept living with nature for time immemorial. The capitalist kind of framework that says, unless you're progressing within a certain trajectory that they themselves have outlined, you know, you are backwards and you are holding mankind from achieving this kind of idealistic, you know, superhero-ness. You know, if,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's wrong. Because we've seen it's wrong because the planet is not surviving. So
Yeah. Of course.
actually, it's about actually thinking, so what is this primitive? What is the savage? What is
Yeah.
the kind of the backwards society that we were told from, the Western gaze wasn't the thing that we were supposed to achieve? And actually, how can we try to incorporate the lessons from that, into today's context? Because it's
Yeah.
not about trying to go back to some idealistic, notion of what, of what we're trying to battle against. But it's worth it kind of knowing that we've been setting a course in terms of humanity that's been guided by a capitalist principle.
Yeah.
And that the only way that we can go forward is to acknowledge that, we've been set off course, and we need to get back to actually another course of thinking, and
That's wild.
and I
That was
don't know,
heavy.
everyone needs to do it, for themselves and community, everything, like it's,
Yeah.
for me, everything starts on an individual level, seeing, like within your own life, within the way that you see the world, how that's going to do, and then talking to, your groups and your societies and your people, how it can happen on a systematic level,
Yeah.
the structures around us.
And I was thinking about that's wild, and that kind of, yeah, that was crazy. I'm still just like taking that in. I wish I could just have like typed up that whole clip of what you said and put it on put it on a billboard and just told everybody to read it. But no, that was wild. And thinking about like just the history of Black music as it is as an idea, and so much of Black music existing within the church, and that a church was kind of the space that Black Americans felt safe with all of the racism that they were experiencing in America back then. And so much of kind of our experience and so much of the ways that we've created resistance culture and Black culture is, again, in response to this structure, because it set us off course outside of the trajectory that we were initially meant to kind of go down, So we think about so much of what we've done has been in response, and not at any fault of our own, just we've made beauty out of it. We've made absolute magic out of it.
Yeah, an idea of culture out of it.
Yeah, actually, though. I was thinking about just the jazz scene in London in particular. And I went back and thought about this last time we spoke about that law that was passed, because I wanted to learn a little bit more about it, having not been born and grown up in London. But and I believe it was called the 696. Which was mad because this law was passed to kind of disrupt the emergence of grime music in London at the time. And on the form, when you were writing out kind of the application for the venue, you had to write down what the ethnicity of the audience would be.
Yeah.
So that was crazy, because that was at the same point where you'd mentioned that the jazz scene in London had also emerged. So that's crazy, because again, this is just this works within the complete framework of white supremacy and their ideas of what music is. And when we look at jazz music is Black music, bebop, blues, it's all Black music, but their ideas of, let's say, masculinity within Blackness is demonstrated within that law structure.
Yeah, I mean, it was a crazy time because, like, just being a jazz musician, there was a point where you were playing a lot. Like when I moved to London, there were gigs, like you could, there were just gigs everywhere. Every pub, every place that, bar had at least once or twice a week a band in the corner playing. You could go and play with your friends who had gigs. It was, real kind of vibe. This was like 2004, and obviously that structure had been around for, since, the 90s. Then all of a sudden, this law comes in, and all the all those places that were having live music, as I say, it's not in our interest because of the kind of fee that you've got to pay to license your venue to play live music. Yeah. So the jazz dies. All that was left is the kind of traditional venues. So like the big venues that were either funded or were kind of historical venues, so people would go to them regardless.
And what kind of jazz music were they hosting? What kind of musicians were playing? What style of jazz were they playing?
What kind of
style of jazz were they playing? Yeah.
Just what you would just label contemporary jazz. either straight
Yeah.
ahead jazz, so like kind of bebop, historical bebop, post bop. Even though I
Yeah.
don't like using those labels, but if you know
Yeah.
what I mean, or what
Yeah.
we would consider to be contemporary jazz. The interesting thing is, and you know, if you want to go and look up this, or anyone wants to go and like search for this, you can. There was this Facebook group that emerged in around like 2010, I reckon.
Mm.
That
Mm.
was called "Why Are There So Few Black Musicians on the UK Jazz Scene?" You
This
know,
is the name of the group.
that was the name of the Facebook group. And
Yeah.
anyone that was into jazz at that time will remember it. That caused, it was a grenade being thrown on the whole industry, you know, because
Mm.
and I think it started because Cleveland Watkins went to, who's a jazz singer from the UK, he went to I think a gig at Ronnie Scott's, was disrespected. He says at
Yeah.
the door by the doorman, even though he's, you know, a legend and an elder in our scene.
Yeah.
So then he kind of went back, and there was a big kind of dialogue about, you know, what is this? You know, what is this?
Yeah.
You know, that we're in, where, you know, that black musicians have to face this kind of
Mm.
disrespect. So then this Facebook page was opened up, and all the stories came out. You know, like it was like nobody could hide. I feel like that was the first point where a lot of people realized that actually, you know, you can write your story on social media, and it will be seen.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not like just telling your friend, or just, you know, saying something and everyone going, okay, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
So a lot of what the racial situation was in London up until that point came out in that group. And loads
Mm.
of people just didn't realize how, they weren't thinking about how imbalanced the racial scene was. Tomorrow's Warriors was doing its thing.
Yeah.
And it was set up to try to remedy the situation, which
Mm.
was, for my generation, not completely bad, because everyone's going to music college together, everyone played together. But the generation
Yeah.
before, and obviously they're the generations who dominated, the generation that dominated the main kind of playing establishments, because they were the kind of,
Yeah.
you know, the kind of working musicians. You know, they saw
Yeah.
a lot of prejudice and a lot of musical segregation. So that on Facebook, we've had a lot to do with bringing out the situation in a way that
Mm.
today's climate is doing the same thing, where a lot of people are going, oh, you know, wow, this thing shouldn't happen, you know, which, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you know, because they can see it, you know, they can see it in front of them.
Mm.
They can't deny the fact that it is there, that kind of rot is there.
Was it easy for you to find places to play back then? Because you just hit up any, because it was mainly in East London, wasn't it? Like
Not at
Total
that stage,
Refreshment.
not at that stage yet. I would say the
Okay.
East London point came slightly later down the line, once that legislation had come in, like really set, and there were a lot less places to play. What I found
Yeah.
was that musicians were finding alternate places, alternate venues. So a lot of
Yeah.
warehouse spaces in East London, and quite a few in like Manor House in North London, would
Yeah.
just have nights. And same with South London, you know, a lot of young promoters who wouldn't even necessarily call themselves promoters would just put together events and put together a lot of their friends who just play different styles of music, and
Yeah.
the energy of the audience and the music all intertwined into what we see now as the kind of young London jazz scene.
Are
Um,
you quoting young, like you're outside of that? Is that how
um,
that?
no, because like the media, or when people write about the jazz scene, they always say like the kind of young London jazz scene.
Yeah.
For me, which is kind of a weird thing, in that, you know, it implies that the scene is a new thing, it's a new development. Whereas for someone like me, that's just, I don't know, been in the scene since I moved to London in
Yeah.
2004.
Okay.
You know, the scene was raging. Like really, what you see now is a response from a really vibrant situation. You know, that was
Yeah.
happening in London, but just without the kind of audience numbers.
Yeah. When you were talking a little bit about purpose, I was thinking about that because kind of just going back to the idea that we've had to respond to everything that's going on at the moment within our kind of larger social climate.
Yeah.
And thinking about how people have had to pivot and adjust their own individual creative purpose as a response to everything that's been going on. They've had to make involuntary shifts within their own creative work, just by product of the whole idea of space, that space is not accessible, whether you're a chef or a musician, or, you know, you kind of engage with a little bit more. It's been really tough for a lot of people. So the current system as it sits, we know, provides absolutely no framework on how to be free. It just doesn't allow for it. It's, and again, within the structures of the idea of a system, freedom doesn't really exist. It's not a place that we want to be seated, which is, again, going back to a lot of the music that you make, speaking about the idea of burning it down, is like, it's such an important kind of revolutionary concept, but a practical a necessity.
If you think about,
sorry.
Oh no, it's just a good point to interject. Sorry, I don't want to kind of cut you off. But if you think about what burning is on a molecular level, burning is the expelling of energy. You know, burning is the energy that is contained in matter being, you know, kind of reaching its kind of truest potential, the combustion. You know, I'm not a physicist. I can't kind of say, you know, from the limited amount of physics I know that, you know, that the act of combustion is energy being released. So I think a lot of the time when people use the word burning, or when people think about burning in their kind of like their mental spaces, they think about destruction as opposed to the unleashing of energy. You know, the kind of the potential.
As a Black person is profoundly different than being in London and being Black. Again, that whole kind of double consciousness that exists out of a place where where everybody's Black, you know?
Yeah.
And kind of, what was that like?
I mean, when I moved back to England, I think you know, if I look back in retrospect, I think that I dealt with the shock by practicing. Basically, I was able to go to a grammar school, and what a grammar school is a school where you've got state schools, which are, I mean, no, you've got comprehensives, which are the schools that are based in terms of areas that you live in. You've got grammar schools where you can get into them without paying, but just in terms of academic results. And then you've got the state schools, which you pay to get into. So I was able, with the grades that I came from Barbados with, I was able to get to go into a grammar school, an all boys grammar school, which, you know, my mum didn't have to pay for, which was great. And I went there, and it was just like all these boys had these networks that they developed all through school. I wasn't interested in being social. You know, for the first time in my life, there was a practice room. You know, the school had a practice block. So I'm like, I am going to be in that practice room every single day. You know, and that's what I did. I in some ways, it wasn't. I practiced and then I went home, and then you know, in my gap year, I practiced for 6-8 hours a day every day, and that's how I was able to get into music college. So in a way, that initial trauma of coming from Barbados to England was muted or dampened by actually me just putting my head in the sand and just practicing my instrument really hard. And in retrospect, I realized that that's exactly what I should have been doing. Because maybe if I was being more social, I would be maybe encountering the reality of what it means to be a Black British person more starkly. Whereas I just came over and I was like, and if you look back to the idea of purpose, one of the things that my mom always did was tell me what the purpose was, you know. Like I always knew we were going to Barbados. I moved to Barbados at 6. And we went there because the racism was so bad. She's a teacher, an English teacher, and she could see what the school system was doing to Black kids at the kind of high school age. And it had started to happen to me already at like 6, you know, the actual kind of just racist shit that's happening in the schools. So she's like, we are going to Barbados because your education will just be more neutral. You'll just be able to learn. And then we come back at 16, you go to high school, have a gap year. After that, 3 years, you have home status again, but you need it after you've been away out
Yeah.
of the country for a certain amount of time. Then go to university and then get another plan. You know, so I came back to England and I knew my plan, my purpose was I study really hard so I can go to university. And that's what I did.
Your purpose was kind of fueled byproduct of your mom, innit?
Yeah.
In that she was like, "This is your purpose."
Yeah. And
And
I was
shooting
like, you
different
know,
years.
that's a good purpose. You know, I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
like,
yeah,
nothing wrong with that purpose, you know. And
yeah,
it was just me and my mum growing up. So it was like, you know, it wasn't, there weren't alternate views. It was just like, we, you know, it was a team effort.
yeah, yeah. That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, because we're thinking about things like creative purpose, and in a way, like it's quite challenging because, again, like we said, like there's no way for people to navigate within the current framework as it sits. So we're thinking about like just something practical is recording the new Sons of Kemet, or is it Sons of Kemet, or is it the
Sons of Kemet.
Kemet album? Speak on that because I'm
Uh,
sure maybe people want to hear it if there is anything to talk about.
in terms of doing that in now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? What I don't want to do is give people a false impression of my productivity through this whole period. I think that's something that you know, just knowing how I've been through this whole like last 3 months. I don't want it to be like, you know, I've done so much stuff. I'm so much better than you, whoever you are on the
Yeah,
other
yeah,
side of
yeah,
that screen.
yeah,
You know, we are mixing, you know, the Sons of Kemet album, and I am, you know, producing stuff, but it has been a struggle. You know,
yeah,
it's been a real struggle, and I think that at the end of the struggle, if I look back at who I am musically and individually now in relation to 3 months ago, I think that I've done as well as I could. But it
okay,
doesn't mean that actually it was just, you know, I just keep working, you know, because I've
yeah,
got loads of time. It, you know, there's just lots of points of not knowing what to do and actually just not feeling like doing anything. And
yeah,
actually, my biggest breakthrough through the whole lockdown period was coming to grips with the fact that it's okay to not feel like doing anything. You know,
yeah,
to actually process the grief of losing all the gigs for the rest of the year, you know,
yeah,
and losing all the kind of promise that has been set up in, you know, mentally of what life is supposed to be.
yeah,
And through that, then it's like, you know, for me, it's like the problem comes when the grief is, when you stick to the grief, you know, for me,
mm,
it's important to process it and then move forward. So, and then, you know, this is something that actually this veteran musician from South Africa that I do a lot of work with, Luis Maholo, he always says, you know, as a kind of one of his catchphrases, and then, you know, and I remember, you know, I always, you know, like laugh when he says it because it's like, actually, that is the truth. You know, you're dealing with loads of shit, and then, you know,
yeah,
like what's next, like what's post the burning. For me, that the lockdown is the burning. The lockdown was a divining rod that separated, you know, an idea of past to an idea of future.
yeah,
So, you know, like my productivity or my artistic process throughout the lockdown was,
mm,
you know, it was scattered.
mm,
And through actually coming to grips with that, the kind of scattered nature of how I was feeling,
mm,
it started with me just going, you know, I know that I love music and I love making music and performing music and performing music to myself. And I know that what I'm doing isn't necessarily making me happy. In terms of just
mm,
trying to carry on. And that might be just carrying on writing, carrying on mixing. So then it was like finding ways of making myself happy with music. And then, you know, it started with me just doing a lot of playing on my little bamboo flutes, you know,
yeah,
just play it all day, you know, because it made
yeah,
me
just
feel good.
chill out.
Yeah.
But that freedom to allow yourself to kind of literally in real time do whatever feels comfortable. And if you're someone that's highly productive, or maybe not even someone that is, just being able to give yourself the permission freedom to kind of exercise whatever that freedom means in real time is important, and kind of not looking back. And that's where we kind of explore the idea of time again, that time within the present can also be a kind of reflection of the past, but also looking towards the future. And those things are allowed to disrupt and overlap and work with each other. Like we need to think about it as a fluid and kind of you know, a little bit of a cyclical and circular experience, you know,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
just because today is today, it's Friday, I have to be productive. It's like you can also not be, and that's all right.
Yeah.
That permission is important.
Yeah, and you know, like for me, it's about when that productivity comes, when you find the thing that you are, and actually, this is a good metaphor for life. Anyway,
Yeah.
like when you find the thing that like that drives you, that gives you that spark, just going
Yeah.
in, not feeling like you have to stop because of something, you know. So like
Mm.
I found my way back into doing composing and back into practicing my like regular instruments, saxophone, the clarinet,
Yeah.
through not practicing them.
Mm.
And for me, like when I kind of found that spark, when I started to practice stuff and work on stuff that was actually giving me life, it was
Yeah.
about going, you know what, I am going to do it, you know, because I like it.
Yeah.
So at one point, I was practicing a lot of bass clarinet, and I would, you know, I'd just wake up, what, 6 in the morning. I'd go walk around the block really quickly and just start practicing
Yeah.
because I found something that was good. You know, I found something
And you
that.
don't indulge in sleep either. So that's not maybe like everybody else. People sleep until noon. When you're waking up at sunrise, that this is you're
Yeah, no,
lucky.
no, that's the one thing
Yeah.
that I've had to be. I think there was a couple of weeks where I didn't, where I was sleeping in later. But the one thing that, as a practice, I try to do is not let myself indulge in sleep, and that doesn't
Yeah.
mean necessarily like depriving myself of sleep. But I think if I hang out in the bed, you know,
Yeah.
like me personally, I find that it gets me into the wrong start of the day.
The
I
lingering is no good.
No, yeah, yeah. I've had periods in my life where I just get up, that alarm will go off, or I'll open my eyes. I had a period of a couple of weeks during lockdown where I would get up at 7:17 or 7:18 every single morning.
Lovely.
I'd open my eyes, look at my clock, it's like Groundhog Day, like 7:17. That's okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll get up, do some
Yeah.
skipping, walk around the block, start work. Or start, I say work, but start doing something, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
Creatively. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and I like getting up. Basically, I like this kind of getting up. But my whole thing is different. You know, I don't recall my dreams, and I think that's a part of it. I'm not connected to my dream world very well, and I know they're
So
intense.
yeah, we have 1 minute, and I think I don't know how Instagram Live works these days, but I feel like it might just cut us off.
It will, if you wanted to continue, you'd have to just start another one. I'll have to join again, and everyone have to
Okay.
rejoin.
If you're cool to do that, I don't mind chatting for a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's it. So you can just
Yeah.
stop
Okay.
it
Cool.
now and then just start a new one if you know.
All right. Cool. See you in a bit.